The name Bluebeard was often used to describe men who would lure women into relationships with promises of happiness and wealth, and then kill them. The name comes from an old fairy tale that goes like this. Bluebeard was a charming, wealthy man who had a blue beard. He met a beautiful young woman and asked her to marry him. She didn't have a great feeling about him, though, and really didn't want to. But the man, in order to impress her, invited the girl and her mother to his country estate for a week. He showered them with gifts and held a banquet in their honor. At the end of the week, he had won the girl and her mother over, and she happily agreed to marry him. Shortly after they married, Bluebeard told his wife that he had to go away on a short trip. He told her that she was free to explore his manor while he was gone and gave her a key so that she could open all the doors. But there was one exception. She could not, under any circumstances, use the key to open the attic. But after he left, curiosity got the best of her, and she opened the forbidden door. And to her horror, she found the bloody dead bodies of all of Bluebeard's ex-wives, all of whom had been beheaded by Bluebeard. And when he returned home and found out that she had opened the attic, he told her that she too must die. Luckily, the woman's brothers arrived just as Bluebeard was about to kill her. They beheaded him instead and rescued their sister.
So, do we have some shout-outs today?
We do. We want to give a big shout-out to the people who supported us through the Buy Me a Coffee. So, thank you to Sherry White, Katie G, Memphis. There's an anonymous one. It just says from someone.
Thanks, someone. Okay, and then we have Big Fan, Moselle Britt, Kim B, Angel Smith, and then we have Ricky Allred. So thank you all so much for supporting the show.
Yes, thank you very much. We don't want to let that go unsaid.
Last year on Valentine's Day, I told the story of the Lonely Hearts Killers. If you haven't listened to that one, you should definitely go back and listen.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you know this, but that's one of my favorite episodes.
Really?
Yeah, and of course, it's a horrible
terrible
story, but the way you brought it, that's been one of my favorite episodes that we've done.
Well, I have another Valentine story today, which is another terrible one about a lady Bluebeard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, last week our story was about Norwegian immigrants.
Yes.
And so it's going to be the same today.
Oh, okay.
Our story starts in Selbu, Norway, with Brynhild Paulsetter, Stresseth.
Strurseth?
Yeah,
That's
I have
my
no
best
idea.
guess. That's my guess. Strurseth?
She was born November 11th in 1859. The daughter of a poor sharecropper who grew just enough food to keep him, his wife, and 7 children from starving to death. In the wintertime, when it was too cold in Norway to grow potatoes, he would take up work as a stonemason. From a very early age, Brynhild and her 7 siblings had to work extremely hard. They fetched water, churned, they milked, they tended to sheep and babies, their siblings, gathered firewood, and, that was just a part of life in those days. For peasant children, their labor was just as essential, really, as their parents.
For survival.
Yeah. She would attend the Evangelical Lutheran Church. I guess it was probably a welcomed break for those children. When she was 14, her pastor, who, was her instructor, he wrote that she was good in religious knowledge and in diligence. That same year, she was hired out by her dad to work as a dairymaid at a neighboring farm. She was responsible for taking care of animals, prepping the milk and other dairy products. She had to carry heavy pails of milk. She, worked in farms. She butchered animals and many other farming tasks. She was actually a big girl, tall, strong, and muscular.
I'm getting this, this vision, this Norwegian woman vision of the 2 blonde
Yep.
braids.
Her job was very physical and her body showed it.
Yes. Farm girl.
Yeah. Her employer at that farm would later say that she was a diligent human being in all ways and that she behaved well.
Okay.
When her work was finished in the evenings, she would relax by knitting, something that she always enjoyed and was good at. She loved hearing stories, those Norwegian tales, and I think she had a pretty uneventful childhood. She was just very poor. There's no documentation of this, but it's rumored that when she was 17, Brynhild got pregnant by a wealthy landowner, possibly by rape. And the story goes on to say that he lured her into the woods and actually beat her until she miscarried.
That's very sad. And I would bet that probably happened a whole lot
I'm sure.
more than we would realize.
I bet it did. And I'm positive that if that did happen, it would have had a profound negative effect on her. But whatever the circumstances, young Brynhild had always dreamed of a better life. Since she was a little girl, she had heard stories about the United States, and she had just always heard if you worked hard, you would prosper there.
The American dream.
Yeah, exactly. And she knew that she was not afraid of hard work. In fact, she kind of liked it, and she was good at it. She knew that if she had a chance to go to the U.S., that she would absolutely become successful. And Brynhild had an older sister, Alina, that was 10 years older than her, who had immigrated to the United States. Her sister settled in Chicago, changed her Norwegian name, Olina, to Nellie, and eventually met and married a man named John Larson. Nellie told him all about her little sister and how much she wanted to come to the New World. And in 1881, Nellie's husband paid for Brynhild's passage to the United States. That was pretty common. We talked about that again in the last episode. Immigrant families, when they would come over and have some extra money, they would often loan their family's money for them to come over. Right. And then they would either work in service for them, maybe cleaning or doing whatever, or they would go out and work and then until they were paid off.
Yeah, like
reimburse them.
Set up and then pay them back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The first thing that Brynhild did when she arrived was she changed her name from Brynhild Paulstetter Sturseth.
That works for me. Let's go with that.
Anyway, she changed her name to the more American-sounding Belle Peterson.
Okay, I was wondering what her name was going to be when she got here.
Yep.
Okay, so Nellie and Belle now.
Nellie and Belle. And that was very common as well for immigrants to change their name.
Right.
Anyway, Belle moved to Chicago and lived with her sister and brother-in-law. She took whatever domestic work she could find, things like sewing, laundry, cleaning houses. She turned over her pay to her brother-in-law until her debt was paid. She had no intention of living that way forever, though. Belle was bound and determined that she was somehow going to make the American dream come true for herself. 3 years after coming over, her debt was paid. And in March of 1884, when Belle was 24 years old, she put on a black silk dress with lace ruffles and triple string pearls, went down to the Evangelical Lutheran Bethania Church, and married a man named Mads Sorensen.
So he was obviously an immigrant too.
He was.
From probably Norway.
He was also from Norway. He was 29, 5 years older than her. He was kind, loving, well-built. He had these broad shoulders, a stylish handlebar mustache. He just seemed like a really good guy.
Yeah.
When they met, Mads worked at the Model Brothers department store on State and Madison Street as the nighttime watchman. He was able to provide Belle with a pretty nice house, and that was really important to her. Mm-hmm. Like we discussed earlier, money and things were important to her. It wasn't a mansion, but like I said, a far cry from what she was used to. Belle loved children. She seemed to have a real maternal instinct. The kids at church were always drawn to her. She just was always playing with them. And I'm sure she expected to start having her own children now that she was married. But unfortunately, it wasn't happening for her.
Oh.
and it was heartbreaking for both her and Mads. Belle was especially close to her sister Nellie's youngest daughter, Olga, who was around 4 years old at that time. And she begged her sister to let her have her niece to raise.
What?
Yes.
That's kind of weird. Maybe back then it wasn't, but that sounds weird
I
to me.
don't know. It sounds strange to me too. And Nellie did feel bad for Belle. She loved her sister. And she actually let Olga go and spend 6 weeks with her aunt. But she was not going to let her sister
give her kid
yeah,
away.
She wasn't going to give her daughter away. And Belle could not understand why. It really made her mad. She felt like Nellie was being selfish. And she felt like she should let her have Olga because she had other children. When this was all over with, Belle really almost completely cut her sister off over this.
I think it should be the other way around.
Right.
Like if I were her sister and she's asking me that, I
For
would
my
maybe
child.
would cut her off.
Right.
She felt slighted.
She did.
Okay.
Yeah. But in 1881, Mads and Bella were really good friends with this couple, the Olsons. She was actually really close to the wife, and Mads was close with the husband. What were you thinking?
I was thinking Nellie Olson.
I know, yeah, I know. The couple, they had a baby daughter during the course of their friendship. So, of course, loving children.
Yeah.
Belle got close to the little girl.
Yes.
Her name was Jenny. When she was just 8 months old, her mother, Bella's friend, something happened to where she was dying. So I don't know if it was cancer or what, but I do know that it was an illness that she was aware she was not going to recover from.
Okay.
And on her deathbed, Belle begged her friend to let her adopt Jenny.
Okay. Well, that's different than
It
just
is.
asking somebody to give you their kid.
It is. And after thinking it over and knowing how hard it would be for her husband to take care of Jenny while also having to work full time, she felt that it would probably be for the best. And she made Bella promise that she would treat Jenny as if she were her own daughter. And she swore she would. And by all accounts, she did. They doted on her, always just dressed like a little doll. They just loved their little baby. Years later, though, Jenny's father remarried, and he tried actually to get custody back of Jenny. But Belle fought him in court, and she won.
I was going to say a minute ago, but a really good friend, instead of trying to just move in and take your child, wouldn't you just say, I will do anything I can to help him raise the baby and be there for him while he's doing this by himself?
Yeah.
But obviously she had this strong desire and she wanted a baby.
She wanted a child, yeah.
And so now he can't get her back.
Right. Nope.
Oh.
And in the beginning, he really stayed connected to her because they continued to be friends for years. And so he was around his daughter all the time and would get to see her. And he just said, she was really happy. She was always well dressed. When he got married, he was like, okay, but it's my baby. It's my child.
Yeah.
But anyway, he didn't win that in court.
So I guess and they didn't stay friends after that, I'm sure.
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm. Matt still did not make a whole lot of money, but the couple somehow saved enough that they were able to buy a candy shop.
Oh.
Yeah, they sold cigars, newspapers, staple grocery items, and all kinds of popular candies. So it sounds like a cool little store, but it really actually didn't do very well.
Okay.
It had a good location, but for whatever reason, it didn't do great. So they thought that they were actually going to lose the business. And this was in less than a year after they opened. That was pretty scary. But before that happened, a fire ended up breaking out in the store, and the inside of the store was just incinerated. Belle had kept kerosene lamps burning in there, and she told insurance adjusters she thought that one probably exploded. Now, they did doubt her claim, but they searched, and through the rubble, they could not find any evidence to the contrary. So they were forced to pay up.
Yeah, but the fact that they doubted her claim makes me a little suspicious too.
Right.
She's after that American dream and she wants to be successful.
Right. And she was about to lose the business.
Yes.
So it just happened that before that happened.
It was convenient anyway.
It was definitely convenient timing for sure. So the Sorensens sold the building, what was left of it. And with their insurance money and the money from the sale of the store, they moved into a kind of a bougie little suburban area where they upgraded to a nice 3-story home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Between 1896 and 1898, 4 children were added to the Sorensens family: Caroline, Axel, Myrtle, and Lucy.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ladies, I don't know about you, but over the last few years, Melody and I have noticed differences in our skin that have been pretty discouraging. You know, the inevitable signs of aging, fine lines, some wrinkles here and there, dull, dry skin, and sunspots. Thankfully, there's a non-invasive treatment available without having to go under the knife. Tasha Briles at Lakeside Integrative in High Point, North Carolina, offers a total skin package that includes radiofrequency microneedling and laser skin resurfacing that can be done right in her office in under an hour. It stimulates collagen growth and elastin that improves the surface and texture of your skin, as well as tightening it. The laser treats acne scars, minimizes large pores, and lessens, if not completely fades, sunspots. Melody and I were blessed to get this treatment in late fall. We're going back for our after photos within a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to post them on our Facebook group. Melody was just saying how she felt like it gave her a fresh start for her skin routine. It even cleared up some precancerous skin lesions she had, and it faded my sunspots completely, as well as brightened and tightened my skin. We're really thrilled with our results. Lakeside Integrative offers an array of other services for men and women, as well as fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss, hormone, and medical treatments. Don't walk, run to the phone and call Lakeside Integrative to set up your appointment at 336-715-0007. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crime sent you.
Okay. First of all, the name's Axel, I love. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to fit with the era that we're in.
I know, but it is cute.
Yeah. And then secondly, did she just suddenly start having children?
Well, she was in her late 30s by this time, and it's written down on census records. So actually, they put Jenny was their foster daughter, and they put these were their biological children.
Well, that's interesting.
It is, but people who knew her had never seen her pregnant. When they would see the children, they looked a little bit older. They were bigger than typical infants, in other words.
Okay.
So it's really actually more likely that they were orphan babies and that she took them in because she was very involved in the Norwegian children's home.
Okay.
Like basically an orphanage.
Okay.
So it's likely that that's where they came from. Sadly, soon after they were born, 2 of these babies passed away. 3-month-old Axel and 5-month-old Caroline. At the time, child mortality rates were extremely high. 100 and 1,000 babies died.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
The deaths of the babies did not stand out as suspicious and really wouldn't have unless actually their deaths were listed as enterocolitis, which is inflammation of the bowels.
Both of them?
Both of them. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
Mads had been working for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, and he was making about $12 a week, which really wasn't bad money back then. Wasn't great, but wasn't horrible either. But then in the fall of 1897, the Sorensens met a man who was an agent for the Yukon Mining and Trading Company. He explained that their corporation was worth more than $3 million and that they were hiring miners who were willing to go to Alaska, work for a year mining gold. And Bella was like, we'll be okay. Go.
Mads didn't really have a choice there, I don't
No.
think.
They agreed and they were really excited and they signed a contract that he would go to Alaska for a year. He was going to be paid this generous salary as well, and he would get a 4th interest on all the mines that were located while he was there. I mean, so they could actually become rich through this.
If those people keep their promises.
Right, wow. Exactly. They also were going to pay Bella $3,500 a month while Mads was gone.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's very generous.
I mean, you think about it, he's making $12 a week and $3,500 a month. That's
life changing.
Yeah, she hit the jackpot.
Exactly. So they were, of course, just over the moon excited about this opportunity. They ended up investing $700 of their own money to cover his expenses for the year. That would have been over $20,000 today.
Wow.
They put up the deed of their house as collateral for the loan that they took out. And needless to say, the couple had been scammed.
Right. I was going to say, like, if you're having to put your own money in there, why would they not cover that if they're going to pay you that much?
Guys, if something looks too good to be true, it is. They sued them and they won, but it wasn't going to help anything. They're about to lose their house.
And you can't squeeze blood out of a turnip.
Yeah, they didn't. This company had nothing.
Yeah.
Mads ended up having to go back to his old job as a security guard at the department store, making less money than the $12 a week. And they were now, like I said, in danger of losing their home. But before that happened, a fire broke out in the Sorensens' home.
Imagine that.
The family home was destroyed, but thankfully their home was insured. So
somebody had the good foresight to have some insurance on that place.
Exactly. So they received a pretty nice payout. And then the family suffered another tragedy just on the heels of the fire. Mads had been sick with a cold for a few days. He told Bella that his head was aching really bad. So she ended up giving him a dose of quinine powder and she put him to bed. And then she went downstairs to cook supper for the kids and to do a few chores. When she came back up to check on Mads, he was dead. Well, when the doctor came, the coroner, they felt like there must have been some kind of a mix-up with the druggist and that the druggist probably accidentally gave Belle morphine instead of the quinine. That she probably actually accidentally overdosed him. So they asked for the packaging that the quinine powders had been in, but Bella said that she had already thrown it away. With nothing to go on, they listed his death as a cerebral hemorrhage. Although her husband's death had been tragic, the timing worked out perfectly for Belle. She, of course, was the beneficiary of his life insurance. See, Mads had this $2,000 policy, but he canceled it because he was getting another one for $3,000, right? With a different company. If he had died even one day later, she would have only collected on the newer policy. But because he died in that very tiny window of time, which was like literally a day, it allowed her to collect on the old policy and the new policy.
Well, how about that?
Yes. So she ended up with $5,000 in insurance money, which today would be $150,000.
And the insurance from the house.
Right. Mads was buried next to his 2 infant children at the Forest Home Cemetery, which is so sad because he was such a nice guy. I really liked him. I mean, I think he might have got a little greedy in there with her, with the fire that broke out in their business. He wasn't there. I don't think he was a part of these things, but like the foolishness about the trading company.
Yeah, and that was foolish.
It really was. But I think we're so aware of scams and they probably just weren't. You know, they were from another country.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But that's such a big jump. You would think they would have had some like big questions there. Like
You would think.
Yeah. Nonetheless.
But after the death of her husband, Belle wanted a change. She missed the country. She thought she'd like to run her own farm. She'd actually went and visited some distant relatives who had a farm, and she was like, yeah, I would really like to get back to this. And she placed an ad in the paper looking for some farm property. In November of 1901, Belle and her 3 children moved to a 48-acre farmstead in LaPorte, Indiana. A year later, Belle remarried to a man named Peter Gunness. They had met Peter years ago when her and her husband, her first husband, Mads, had taken in some boarders. Peter had come to stay with them, and then he left there to go get married, right? So he got married. He had a child. Then his wife was given birth to their second child, and she passed away.
Okay.
Belle had heard about this, and so she wanted to become reacquainted with him. He was handsome.
So she went out there for a reason.
Yes. He was literally described as a fine-looking blonde Viking of a man.
I want to see
And that
picture.
pretty much sums him up. I'll have to show you. What's so strange is that Bella was not really that pretty.
Oh, really?
No. I mean, okay, when she was younger, she was always described as not pretty, but I kind of disagree. I don't think when she was younger, she was bigger, but she worked hard. So she was a bigger woman, but I don't think that means she's ugly. But as she got older, she lost what little bit she had. But this was her description. This is how people described her. And it was mean. But they said she was a heavy featured woman with a big head covered by a mop of mud colored hair, small eyes, huge hands and arms, and a gross body supported by feet that were grotesquely small.
Good gracious.
I know.
Who wrote this?
Brutal.
I'm telling you, some of those, when you read some of those old newspaper articles, it is like so hard to believe sometimes. Like,
yeah,
I'm
she
like,
was being shamed in all
that's
areas.
awful. The body positive movement was definitely not here yet.
Nope. But again, I think she actually wasn't ugly when she was young, but I think life was hard back then. By the time she married Mr. Gunness, she had aged out of her prime. We'll just say that.
But he still married her?
Yeah.
This blonde Viking of a man?
Yes. She didn't have any hard time finding a man. And I did read in one article that speaks more to her probably 48-acre property than it did to her.
That's funny.
But still, she seems to have found happiness again. She had her farm. She was married to this good-looking man. But tragedy struck again when just 5 days after they were married, her new husband's 7-month-old baby daughter suddenly died.
Oh, man. I don't like that.
Her official cause of death was edema of the lungs.
Okay.
So sad. And Mr. Gunness, of course, was heartbroken. But he never suspected anything sinister. These tragedies were a part of life. The Guinnesses shipped the little body to Chicago, where she was buried next to Belle's 2 other babies that had died. But aside from that, life seemed pretty good. Belle's kids got along great with Peter Gunness, who they called Papa, and his 5-year-old daughter called Belle Mama.
Oh.
They worked hard together. They farmed together. And Peter was a butcher by trade. He would have been a good help there to her on the farm.
Absolutely.
They were settled into their lives. But then 8 months later, on December 16th at 3 a.m., Belle's foster daughter, who was 12 at the time.
Oh,
the first little girl that she had gotten from
Jenny.
her friend, Jenny. She ran to one of her neighbors' homes and beat on the door. And when they answered, she was standing there with a fire poker in her hand, screaming, "Please hurry to the house," that her papa had been burned. When the neighbor got to the house, Peter Gunness was laying face down on the floor in his night clothes. And there was a serious wound on the back of his head and blood he was dead.
Yeah.
By the time they got there. Belle was screaming and frantically crying. Nobody was able to console her. When she finally got her composure, hours later, she said that her husband had butchered a hog that day and that she had been making sausage. She was grinding the pork with a sausage grinder and stuffing the casings with the meat. She said when she'd finished up, she'd washed the grinder and went into the parlor to hang out with Peter. She said that he was out there smoking his pipe and they were just talking. You know, she was doing some knitting. They were spending their evening together and the kids were in bed. She said that at about 11 p.m., Peter got up and was going to go outside, probably to the outhouse. They didn't clarify that, but he went to the side of the kitchen stove to get his shoes because he put them there to keep them warm.
Yeah.
Belle said the next thing she knew, she heard a loud noise. When she ran to see what was the matter, Peter had his hand over his head, saying that he'd been burned by the brine that was left on the stove. Do you know what hog head cheese is? Mm-hmm. She was going to make some head cheese out of the leftover pork. She said that she wasn't going to use it till the next day, so she just left it there. It had been sitting there for quite a while, but she said it was still hot enough. She realized later, though, but not until after she knew that he was dead, that what had killed him was the meat grinder fell and hit him on the head. Belle said she doctored his burns with some Vaseline and baking soda. She never even realized that he had been hit on the head. And then after she doctored his burns, he said he was fine and they were just going to go ahead and go to bed. So about an hour later, that had happened around 11, about midnight, they went to bed. And then at around 3 a.m., Peter got back up yelling, "Mama, my head, it's burning, it's hurting." Belle said that's when she sent Jenny to the neighbors, but by the time they got there, it was too late. So the town doctor arrives on the scene. Even before Belle got out her story, he was there. But he said that Peter had not just died because rigor mortis had already begun to set in. Belle said Peter had been burnt by the brine on the stove, and he did have burns on the back of his neck, but they were post-mortem burns. When he examined the body, he of course saw that Peter had this big gash in the back of his head, like he'd been hit with something, and there was this thick, congealed, caked blood on the back of his head because he was laying face down. And his nose was broken and completely bent to one side. So he ordered a coroner's inquest because he strongly suspected murder. They questioned Belle and they questioned Jenny. Belle's foster daughter, it was interesting to me about the fire poker. I don't know why, but that
she had that when she ran over there?
Yeah. And she said she used it to like beat on the door, but to me it was just interesting that she had it in her hand. But
it is a little odd little detail.
Yeah, it was. And it may be nothing. Her story matched Belle's so completely that they 100% suspected that she had to have been coached. And they asked her, but she was like, no, I haven't. Belle, who seemed so distraught, over the death of Peter when it first happened, when she was asked if they had a happy marriage, she shrugged and said, "As far as I know," and didn't have a tear in her eye.
Yeah, that's a little sus.
It is. And as much as they didn't believe her story that a falling meat grinder killed her husband, there was no direct evidence of murder. And so the cause of death was officially listed as an accidental intracranial hemorrhage due to the impact of a fallen sausage mill grinder.
And it said all that? Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. A few months later, Belle supposedly gave birth to a baby boy. I'm not going to say she's old, but she's in her 40s.
Yeah.
And you can give birth in your 40s.
True that.
Absolutely. You know that.
Yes.
But I feel like at that time, it
probably
just,
not a,
maybe it wasn't that rare, but I don't even know that she'd given birth before.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering if any of those babies were hers biologically.
Yeah. None of the neighbors, again, even knew that she was pregnant. When the town midwife heard she was giving birth, she ran over to assist Belle in the delivery, only to find an abnormally large baby already born, bathed, dressed, and Belle was out in the backyard chasing a hog.
Okay.
So
I got a lot of stuff going through my brain, but carry on.
Strange, right?
Yeah.
And she was just like, "We don't stop farm chores for
sorry,
birth,
but I got to get this
for
hog."
babies." Yeah. She just acted like it was no big deal. But anyway,
women were tougher back then, but goodness.
I guess. Peter Gunness's brother named Gus, and he smelled a rat. The fact that he had lost a healthy infant niece and his brother in less than a year after marrying Belle was far too much of a coincidence. To him.
And he probably doesn't know even about the other husband that died and the two houses that have burned.
No, he has no idea about any of that. And she still had his 5-year-old niece.
Ooh.
Yeah. Her name was Swanhild.
Oh,
isn't that
that's
pretty?
Cute.
I mean, I don't blame him for being nervous.
Yeah, good for him to think about that.
Yeah, he feared for her safety. He knew that just before his brother married Belle, he took out a $2,500 life insurance policy naming Swanhild as the beneficiary.
Oh, yeah. He's got to get her out of there.
Mm-hmm. So Gus wanted to make sure that Belle did not get her hands on his niece's money and that she survived. Yeah.
Right.
So in 1903, he made the trip from Minneapolis, where he lived, to LaPorte. Belle told Gus that before he passed, Peter had turned the insurance policy over to a mining company to purchase stock with it for Swanhild, and that someday she would be rich for it. But Belle never would show him any of the stock certificates when he asked to see them, and he just knew she was full of it. Belle did ask him if he would stay with her and help her manage the farm.
She's fishing for another man.
I know.
Sounds like.
He said that he felt so uneasy, like this sense of dread came over him. He got up in the middle of the night, took his little niece, and they went back home to Minneapolis.
Good for him.
Yes.
He probably did save both of their lives.
With Peter gone, Belle had to do all the work around the farm herself. She planted the fields, she harvested, milked the cows, butchered her own meat. She went to farm auctions, bought hogs. They said she was just as strong as any man, that she could lift a 200-pound hog and throw it in the back of her wagon like it was nothing.
I bet so, too.
In the winter of 1904, a 30-year-old Norwegian immigrant named Olaf Lindboe, living in Chicago, came across a help wanted ad in a Scandinavian newspaper that Belle had actually taken out. He took $600 and packed up everything he owned to move to Belle's farm. Everyone noticed, they got really close really fast. Olaf wrote to his father, raving about the farm, telling him that he was engaged and that he was going to marry Belle. He was a really likable, just a friendly guy. And he had become friends with some of the neighbors. But one of the neighbors was really shocked when Belle had to hire on another neighbor for help because her hired hand, Olaf, had left her high and dry in the middle of corn planting season.
In summer. That was a Frozen reference.
Oh.
Olaf sings in summer.
She told the neighbors who Olaf had become friends with that he wanted to go to St. Louis to see the World's Fair and was wanting to buy some land over there. And after not hearing any word from his son in months, because like I said, he had written his dad saying, I'm going to marry her. Mm-hmm. Olaf's father wrote Belle asking her about him and why he hadn't written. Belle wrote that he had gone out west and took up a home place out there. In the spring of 1905, just a month after Olaf left, a man named Henry Gerholt arrived at the farm. He, too, had answered an ad taken out by Belle in a Scandinavian newspaper. He had a heavy trunk with him that Belle's neighbor helped him carry to the house. Belle rolled out the red carpet, and she always did. She would cook these great Norwegian meals that they just missed so much. We talked about that in last week's episode. They were lonely. They didn't have their families with them. She fixed him up this really nice room with this comfortable bed. He wrote his mom telling her how beautiful the farm was and how Belle treated him like he was her own family. He was a diligent worker and was always with Belle. So her neighbor, Christopherson, was surprised when Belle showed up at his house again, asking for help with the oat harvest. She told him Henry had taken sick and had to go back to Chicago because he couldn't do the hard work anymore. She said he only took a few clothes, but left his trunk with all his valuables, including a fur coat there.
This neighbor has got to be getting curious about this.
Well, he did think it was weird because he saw Belle wearing Henry's coat, and he thought, now, why would a sick man not take his good coat to Chicago?
Right.
It didn't make any sense. But what do you do?
Right.
Back then, I feel like people thought, it's well, kind of like we do today. Like, is that really any of my business?
Right. It's like she's wearing somebody else's coat. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And then in 1905, Belle took out another article. This time, a Lonely Hearts ad.
Oh. Oh.
in a Scandinavian newspaper that read, "Woman owns a beautifully located and valuable farm in first-class condition, wants a good and reliable man as a partner in same. Some little cash is required." The postman said that he delivered anywhere from 1 to 10 letters to Belle every single morning
Wow.
after she put out that ad. George Barry, a middle-aged Norwegian man, took Belle up on that and headed her way with $1,500. Today, that would be $40,000. He told his family that he was going to marry a widow that needed help on her farm. Another man, Christian Dover, sold his farm and took $2,000 to LaPorte, telling his friends and family he was marrying a rich widow. Then there was Emil Tell, a Swedish man from Kansas who quit his job to go to Belle with his savings in hand. There was Ole Budsberg, a 40-year-old man. There was Joe Moe, and just man after man after man. One of Belle's farmhands, 19-year-old Emil Greening, said that Belle literally had different men there every week carrying trunks. She told him that they were her cousins. And later he was like, she had a lot of cousins.
Oh my goodness.
She had a lot of cousins there, but none of them stayed around very long. And later, when thinking back, over the whole thing, it was odd that nobody ever saw any of them leave.
Yeah, lots of them were coming, but none of them were leaving.
And this farmhand later remembered accidentally stumbling into a room with over 15 trunks in it.
And none of them took their trunks with them.
Right. But he noticed men's clothes after the fact he recalled. When Belle realized that he had saw those trunks, she explained that her cousins, they were going to be coming back for them at some point. She just made up this thing that they were all going to this specific location, but they were going to be back for their stuff. Then in the summer of 1906, Belle hired a neighbor, William Brogiski, to dig some holes for her in her hog pen. She wanted them 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 4 feet deep.
Well, imagine that.
She said that she wanted it for all the garbage that the hogs couldn't eat and that she couldn't burn. So, yeah.
But they were only 4 feet deep.
Yeah.
Not 6 feet deep. But...
No, 4 feet deep. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So Belle's foster daughter, Jenny, she was 16 now at this time in the fall of 1906, and she had become absolutely beautiful. There were lots of boys around town who were interested in courting her. Now, one of them was Belle's 19-year-old farmhand, the one that recalled seeing those trunks, Emil Greening. He was pretty smitten with her. I don't know that she liked him like that, but they had become good friends. In the winter of 1906, he was sad when she told him that she was going to get to go to California and she was going to college there. 10 days before Christmas, Belle told Emil that she had arranged for the professor of the college to come and escort Jenny to school. He'd missed them. He didn't even get to say goodbye to her. And so he was sad. And then this other boy who was absolutely in love with Jenny, and I think she liked him as well, was just as devastated when he found out that she was leaving. But Jenny said, "I promise I'll write to you always, and I'll be back." He wrote letters to her, never got a response. One day when he was out, he saw Belle and he told her, like, "Look, I've been writing to Jenny. I haven't gotten one response." And she was like, "Didn't you get married?" And he said, "No." He was like, "My brother got married. Please write her and tell her that was not me. That was my brother. I'm single." And she promised that she would tell her. And so he continued to write, but she just kept ignoring him. And then a few months after Jenny left, Emil, he didn't want to work there anymore because he was probably there interested in her. So he ended up quitting the farm and going to work somewhere else. In June of 1907, Belle hired a man named Ray Lamphere. He was 37 years old. He drank a lot. He had come from, I guess, a family that used to be kind of prosperous. But his dad, he lived kind of loose. You know what I mean? and ended up ruining his reputation, losing his family, losing all their money, that kind of thing. Ray was a good worker when he was sober, but that wasn't often.
Right.
It wasn't long before the two of them were actually having a sexual affair. He was only 37. He was a lot younger than her, too.
I was going to say, by then, she's like in her late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Belle would come into his room at night.
She's
being
brazen.
like, she would climb into his bed, and it said that she would purr like a cat. That she would be like really sweet and caress him. I feel like she was using him. He honestly fell head over heels in love with her. He bragged to his friends that it wouldn't be long that he was going to be the man of the farm. Yeah, he was in love. And so Ray was hurt and mad and confused when a man named Andrew Helgeline, a 49-year-old Norwegian wheat farmer, showed up at the farm in early January of 1908. Belle had spent a year and a half writing nearly 80 letters to this man, wooing him, convincing him to bring his savings and come to her. She wrote things like, "I do not even think a queen would be good enough for you. My thought of you stands highest above all high, and nothing will stand in the way of my doing everything for you." She wrote about how happy they would be together, that he had worked hard all of his life, and now she wanted him to take it easy for the rest of his life. She told him that he shouldn't mention coming to anyone so that they could make it a big surprise to his family after they were all settled in. "My dear, do not say anything about coming here. Then the surprise will be so much greater." She told him to sell everything he had for cash and just bring whatever he had left with him in a trunk. She was like, don't leave any bond, any stock, like sell it all. Don't leave any ties. Come and be with me.
And she's running the con.
Yeah, she really was. He actually put her off for a year and a half. I think he was lonely and maybe just wanted a pen pal to start with. But she ended up kind of giving him an ultimatum there at the end. And so he finally did come.
It always surprises me, though, when people have like a little bit of hesitation.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason. They probably have
Yes,
that. They're
trust
feeling
your
it.
gut.
And yet they still eventually they wear them down and they talk them into it and they go against probably their better judgment.
Yeah. So yeah, Ray, like the farmhand that was in love with Belle, he was shocked when Andrew got there. And on the morning of January 3rd, he just shows up. And Belle told him he was going to have to sleep in the barn because her guest was going to be needing that bedroom. 10 days later, Andrew's brother, his name was Ashley, was kind of starting to worry about him. He had told him that he would hear from him within a week, and he hadn't heard a thing from his brother since he had left for LaPorte.
So she had told him not to tell anyone, but he had told his brother.
He hadn't, actually.
Oh.
He found out where he was in a roundabout way. So he knew that he was going to LaPorte. The reason he was able to kind of pinpoint where he was is that he had stopped at a friend of theirs' house. He had told his brother, I'm going to stop here. So the brother contacted this friend and she's like, yes, he had been here. So they ended up going to his house and finding these letters.
Okay.
That's how they were able to pinpoint it down. So the brothers were close and he just felt like something was wrong because he just had that sick feeling. And he ended up finding out, like I said, where Belle lived and her address. And he wrote, and this is what she wrote back. You wish to know where your brother keeps himself? Well, this is also what I would like to know. It almost seems impossible for me to give a definite answer. Andrew had mentioned going off in search of his long-lost brother. He was going to look in New York and maybe Norway. And Ashley knew that was hogwash. So all that's going on. And then meanwhile, this working relationship between Ray and Belle isn't working out either. Because now he's ticked.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, you're bringing...
Right.
I thought we had a thing, you know.
He thought he was going to be the man of that farm.
Exactly. And there are no details as to what happened that led up to this. But on February 3rd in 1908, Belle ran him off. And when he came back to try to get his stuff, she actually pointed a pistol at him and was like, I said, leave. She ended up going to the authorities and telling them basically that Ray was stalking her. She said that she was afraid for herself and her children because he threatened to burn her house down. In March, Ray showed up at Belle's house drunk. She had him arrested for trespassing. He did plead guilty and was ordered to pay her $1 in restitution, I guess. She tried to have him declared legally insane. It was like this big, weird trial, but it didn't work. They were like, he's not insane.
But it's just so weird that he hasn't gone missing.
Well, none of the locals went missing.
Oh, he was more of, okay, I might have
He was
missed
a
that. He was a
local.
local. Okay.
Yeah, none
People
of the
around there knew
locals.
him.
So, yeah. Now, but at least one or two of these times that she said that Ray had trespassed, he had a solid alibi. So she's kind of like making stuff up about him.
Maybe she wants him to stay away from there because he's maybe snooping around.
Right. This was actually before she tried to have Ray deemed insane and was saying how afraid she was of him. Andrew's brother wrote Belle and told her that he was coming to LaPorte and that he was going to search for his brother. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to help you with that. And he's like, well, I'm coming, so you better figure something out. Belle was going all over town telling everybody how crazy Ray was and how he was threatening her and her children. She actually seems terrified. On Monday, April 27th in 1908, Belle's daughters didn't go to school. Belle went to her lawyer and made out a will. She was crying and she told them that she was so afraid of Ray that she wanted to go ahead and get her affairs in order. She left all of her property to her 3 children and to the Norwegian Children's Home in the event that all of her 3 children were dead. Then she made a $750 deposit to the state bank before heading over to the candy store where she bought candy, cake, and a toy train for her children. She told the clerk that she was giving the kids a little surprise, and the lady asked, like, is it one of their birthdays? And she said, no, I just want to surprise them. I mean, that was just kind of out of the norm for that time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's more normal today. Then she bought some groceries, and she got 2 gallons of kerosene in a borrowed 5-gallon can. And just before she left the store, Ray actually came in to buy some chewing tobacco. And he did not say a word to her, and she didn't say a word to him. She went home, she fixed supper, she ate with the farmhand and her children. Her farmhand's name was Maxon. And after they were done eating and they had cleaned up, she was sitting on the floor playing with the train with her kids. And he went on ahead and went to the bedroom to go to sleep. Maxon woke up at about 4 a.m. thinking that Belle was cooking breakfast. You know, you wake up like in kind of you're fast asleep. Yeah. But he realized that the house was on fire. He was able to grab an axe and somehow chop himself out the door. I mean, because he was kind of shut in to where he couldn't get out. As soon as he got out, the ceiling collapsed into where, I mean, it would have killed him.
Wow.
For sure, he would have been dead. By this time, a neighbor boy saw what was going on, and he pedaled his bicycle as quick as he could over to their house. He tried his best to wake everybody up, but didn't get any answer, didn't hear anybody. Some other neighbors at this point start joining in, and they were able to break some glass and kind of holler in to where they knew that somebody would hear them.
Yeah.
But they didn't get any answer. They hunted down a ladder and climbed up, and they were able to peer into the window of the first floor. And they could see into the corner of the room where there was the bed, but there were no bodies and there were no sheets. And they didn't see any person there. They were able to do the same thing on the second floor. Same thing, empty bed, but no bodies. Anyway, it didn't take long to realize there was going to be nothing they could do. This house was up in a blaze. So they notified the sheriff, and the fire burned for hours. When it was finally over, the townspeople volunteered to look through the rubble for the victims' remains. They hoped that by some miracle, Belle and her children had made it out alive. But after hours of searching, they found the badly burned torso of a woman with 3 charred children's remains huddled around the torso. And the town, as you can imagine, was outraged. And their focus was Ray. Absolutely. You know, they were thinking Belle tried to tell us, and now... And just the way it looked, there's this mother with her babies all huddled around her. Oh my gosh. Then they start thinking about Jenny. Belle's sister was contacted.
Nellie
Was contacted. And even though she hadn't had much to do with her sister and her kind of had an estranged relationship, she still knew Jenny and was like, we got to get in touch with her.
Right.
Ray, of course, was arrested.
Yeah, poor Ray.
Now, he was at his job on another farm when they arrested him. He hadn't hid or anything like that. He was in deep trouble. They brought him up on first-degree murder charges. Now, he did have an alibi, but his alibi was that he had spent the night with this 70-something-year-old black woman that at that time, you know how taboo that was.
Yes.
It didn't help. That did nothing to like bolster his claims of innocence.
Right. Plus, she did a lot of work to frame him up.
Right. So even though Lizzie confirmed it, still nobody believed a word he said. So he was handcuffed. They took him to the morgue and forced him to look at these bodies. They just said that he shook and was like, my God, this is awful. They still couldn't locate Belle, her head. Yeah. So they had her body, but no head. A mortician said at the time that he just didn't feel like that fire would have cremated, you know, just her head.
Right.
So they started to wonder if that animal, Ray, had decapitated her and hit her head somewhere and then trying to cover it up, set the house on fire. A few days later, they were trying to figure all this out. Well, about this time, Andrew's brother, Ashley, arrives. Remember, he says he's coming
because
to town.
he was coming, yeah.
Yes, so he arrives in LaPorte.
I forgot about him.
He gets there and realizes the only woman who possibly knows where his brother's at is dead. So he starts to leave, and then he's like, hey, he goes to the farmhand, to Maxim, and he says, hey, are there any holes on this property? Do you know of any places that have been dug recently? And he's like, yeah, actually I do. I just dug some holes for trash. And so he was like, well, can you point me in that direction? And Maxim was like, sure. You know, after being pointed in that general direction, he dug around until he felt a soft spot. And then he dug down about 3 feet until he felt something. And when it was uncovered, they realized that it was the severed head and dismembered body of his brother. Andrew knew it was him by the clothes and some other still recognizable features. Everyone there was just like, I mean, nobody really knew what was going on.
It's so bizarre, yeah.
Yeah. So then by this time, some neighbors, they were trying to contact Jenny in Los Angeles at this college that Belle told everybody she was at. But the school said they don't know who she is, and she had never been at that school. And the next uncovered grave was that of a young girl with long blonde hair still attached to the skull. And poor Jenny had never made it to California.
Oh, that gave me cold chills when you told that. Wow.
She'd never left the farm.
Which we knew. I mean, you kind of knew, but still, it's like, wow.
So they keep digging.
Yeah, and they keep finding bodies.
They found the cut up bodies of at least 12 people.
I was trying to count while you were talking about all these people, and I did lose count at like 7.
They realized that she would bludgeon her victims. She would probably poison some of them. And then at some point she would bludgeon them or hit them with a meat cleaver, whatever. And then take them out to the barn where she literally butchered them like she did her hogs.
You know, you said that she could pick up a hog and carry it. And so
she was a strong woman.
She could do it. Wow.
Then the newspapers.
Oh, yeah.
Now she's nicknamed Belle Gunness, Butcher of Men. Belle Gunness, Hell's Princess.
Wow.
Just like all these nicknames. They laid the bodies out. Can you imagine, first of all, these bodies? Because they're disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
They've been rotting. They're dismembered.
Right.
But they have to lay them out because they have to try to make identifications.
Yeah.
And so these families would come and when they had missing loved ones and would, come and try to see if. So there were 2 sons, Oscar and Matthew, and they recognized their father by his wire-rimmed glasses and what was left of his mustache and a few pieces of clothes. Surprisingly, most of them were identified.
Wow. Which is, is surprising.
But even though they realized, like, okay, she's a disgusting murderess, still her children did not deserve to die like that. So the prosecution is like, okay, but he still has to be punished.
What? They're going to still punish Ray?
Mm-hmm. His lawyers and other people are like, okay, wait a second. First of all, there's no head.
Right.
We know that she takes heads off of bodies.
Mm-hmm.
This corpse was 4 inches, shorter than she would have been. Plus, she was a big woman. I think it was like 60-something pounds that these remains weighed. They would have been burned down, but not that much, is what they were saying.
Mm.
They did start to wonder, like, is
she even
that
really dead?
Belle? Like, is she dead? Now, they did end up finding her false teeth. The jury decided they did not find him guilty of murder, but they did find him guilty of arson.
What?
Yeah, so stupid.
Still, poor Ray.
Yeah, and he died and never got out of prison.
Really?
He got sick, yes. And at 38 years old, he died in prison. He was only going to serve a year.
Poor guy.
And he was so excited about getting out and never made it out. Now we're left with what happened. Here are these are
theories?
kind of the theories. So either Ray did kill her and the children, or she committed suicide and killed her children.
But she couldn't have cut her own head off.
Right. Or she maybe dug up a body.
That's what I think.
Or killed somebody. I mean, she's not beyond that either. I think most people believe those were her children.
I do too.
But it wasn't her.
I think it was that buying them candy the day before. I think she was getting ready to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But she couldn't have cut her own head off without...
No.
And still continued to do the rest of the crime.
Right.
So I don't think she died. I think that was somebody else's body. And she staged it with those kids around her like that. I mean, that was like is that the 3rd place that she's had that's caught fire?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think Ray is guilty of arson either.
And I don't know if I think she committed suicide but again, the head.
Yeah, she didn't commit suicide if that was a headless body.
But they found her teeth. So I was like, well, maybe her head did really, because, the prosecution said her head was cremated. But then, the defense was like, no, I think she did it. I don't think Ray did it. But I think she was such an evil person that she knew that the brother was coming. Yeah. That Ashley was coming.
Yeah, she was getting ready to get found out. She set Ray up. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to set him up if she's going to kill herself.
Right. And she probably thought, even if they found the bodies, they would have probably thought he did it because he was so jealous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she walked free. I mean, she took all those assets from all those many victims and took off and probably lived somewhere else until she died.
Yep.
That's what I think.
I mean, they think she might have killed up to like 30-something men because the thing is that they found for sure, what did I say, 12 bodies? But she had poured quicklime on a lot of bodies too. So they were saying that there may have been even way more than that. So, of course, she killed I believe she killed those other children.
I do too.
I believe she killed her husband,
Yes. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So be careful who you hook up with on these dating sites.
For real.
It's a dangerous world out there. People are evil.
I know, but when you hear something like that, that, but when you actually hear that story it's just hard to wrap your mind around it.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
I had never heard the story of Bluebeard before, but I think the real moral to the story is nobody gets their head cut off for listening to Hard Times and True Crimes. So if you want to make sure your husband or your wife's brothers don't cut your head off, you make sure you download every episode and tell everybody you know and a few people you don't to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.